Okay, let's talk about dopamine now. It turns out that, most of these drugs that we're going to be describing in the second half of this class, alcohol, opiates, marijuana, psychostimulants, they're going to be influencing particular networks in the brain, right? Specifically dopamine networks, specifically the mesolimbic and the mesocortical pathways. All of these drugs, acting through various mechanisms, are going to increase dopamine activity in the mesolimbic and mesocortical networks. Just as review, we have a brainstem nucleus called the VTA, right, which is the source of neuron cell bodies that are going to send their axons out into various structures, right, and they're going to release dopamine. These two here, the projection from the VTA into the hypothalamus and from the VTA up here into the nucleus accumbens, this particular pathway, dopaminergic pathway, is referred to as the mesolimbic pathway. It's going into structures that are associated with the limbic system, with the emotional kind of and expression and experience regions of the brain. There's also this projection originating in the VTA, right? Axons that are heading out and heading a little bit further forward in the brain and releasing dopamine in what we refer to as the prefrontal cortex. So parts of the brain that are essential for decision making, inhibition of emotional expression, basically judgment, behavior, motor activity. A lot of this is going to be, part of this mesocortical network that's originating in the VTA and heading here. So drugs that have significant, dependence liability, abuse liability, activate these networks. They tend to, increase activity, increase the release of dopamine in these networks. Now, there's been an effort, right, to try to explain why this activity, is significant and is likely to, encourage continued use, right? Is it just, this is pleasure right here? This is the sort of motivational pleasure circuit? What is activity in the mesolimbic and mesocortical network? What is that actually doing in the brain that encourages continued use, right? Well, one idea proposed by an individual more recently named Antonio Damasio is that activity in this network helps to remap, the areas of the brain that are reflecting, what the body state currently is. So, let's say you feel fine, you take cocaine for the very first time, right? Well, cocaine will activate these networks and release a lot of dopamine, right? This will have the effect of remapping areas of the brain, like the insular lobe we talked about earlier, which are receiving information from the internal state of the body, etc., right? And also some frontal areas that are associated with the limbic system, right, that are mapping the internal state of the body. They sort of remap the body in an incredibly euphoric, almost orgasmic sort of state, right? A terrific, fantastic, amazing experience. Probably the best you've ever felt, right? This, of course, is going to be noticed, right, by your frontal lobe, and it's going to help to wire, networks here so that you're going to continue to seek out this terrific, experience. But as you continue with these drugs, right, there are changes in these networks so that, it doesn't produce as much dopamine or release as much dopamine, or it doesn't respond as much postsynaptically to the dopamine that's released. Remember, there are going to be changes in how these networks are wired up, upregulation, downregulation, right, of particular receptors. And then, with continued use of these substances, your body starts to feel lousy. You start to feel worse. You start to develop, some of these withdrawal symptoms, right? And your body, the areas that are mapping the body, are mapping the actual state in a very unpleasant state, and you don't feel good, right? So when you take these drugs and you weakly stimulate now this network, it still helps to remap, those areas like the insula, some frontal regions, to reflect the body in a better state. It's not necessarily a euphoric state anymore, but it's a state that does not reflect the actual sort of miserable state of your body at that stage, in your addiction.